have this presentation every year. It's always, I have to say, a little bit depressing, but there we are. Yeah, I know it's going to be. To you for coming along and helping us to join the budget consultation, because obviously lots of people here think it's really important. So I would like to welcome you and hand over. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Firstly, can I just confirm that Matt is on the call? I see him in the.
Yeah, I'm here, Mary.
Great. Thank you, Matt.
Great.
Okay.
And let me know when you wanted to Mary.
All right. Thanks very much. Well, good morning, everybody. And yes, what a year! What a year it's been, hey? A very, very strange and difficult year since I last spoke to you, talking about all the savings that we're making. Can you hear me? Because I haven't got a.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
I could hear. Sorry, I could hear a bit of feedback. Somebody's probably not on mute, but anyway, when I spoke last year, we'd heard of this virus, but had no idea of the havoc and destruction and devastation it was going to bring with all the tragedy that it brought in its wake. So I'm pleased to see so many of you on this call. 81, I think, so far. And I hope you're all keeping safe and well. In that period, new words have entered our language, haven't they? Like lockdown, social distancing, and the Zoom shout of "you're on mute." I'll never forget that. During that time, the council has continued to do its best. Many staff have been equipped to work from home to deal with the benefits, advice and assistance, debt relief, homelessness, income collection, administering millions of pounds in grants and assistance to local businesses. And others on the front line are continuing to collect our rubbish, making sure the streets are clean and safe, looking after our vulnerable and our children. And they, of course, too are affected by the deadly virus, so some may be self-isolating at certain periods of time. And of course, some of our care workers have died tragically and some of our residents have. And it's been a very difficult and challenging year, physically, mentally, emotionally and financially. You know, I'd hoped to be talking to you today to present a different kind of narrative about our budget process, because although we've had to make savings over the years, we have tried to continue to deliver good services. You know, I wanted to say that despite 10 years of austerity, or maybe in spite of it, the budget gap for next year, after we'd identified 11 million of savings, will be just £3 million, which is, you know, I say just 3 million as a comparison, not as a statement of value. Because over the 10 years, you will recall that our core funding was cut by the government by nearly 60%, and we've had to find 193 million to continue to provide those services. So I wanted to put next year's budget into context. And the context of that is, without COVID, we would have been in quite a robust position, a sound, robust position. But COVID, the impact of COVID on our finances has been huge. And it's the impact of the loss of income, the impact on the savings programme, the impact of additional costs of COVID that led to an initial forecast of 64.6 million. And the government saying it would stand shoulder to shoulder with local government to do whatever it takes, had by November provided just £30.9 million in 4 tranches. So you can see that there was a huge gap that we'd have to deal with. In the autumn review, we did have further assistance. So plus the extension of the furlough scheme that was due to end in October has now been extended until April. And that helped the situation and brought that cost down to 55.8 million. A word on furloughs. We've got 52,000 people on furlough in Enfield. That's 1/3 of the working age population. So that is a huge pressure. It's a huge worry for those people, obviously, whether they will have a job at the end of it. So that will all have an impact on our finances, on our council tax collection, because one of the biggest pressures arises from council tax and the impact on the collection fund. The government said we can run a collection fund deficit over 3 years. So that will help us this year, but for next year, we've got to add that cost in over the next 3 years. And also, our council tax support scheme. As you know, we have a support scheme that assists people to pay their council tax. So we reduce the cost of the council tax to the people on benefits or those who are in certain categories. More and more people are qualifying for council tax support. So that scheme, which costs about 32 million last year, is increasing in cost. So there's another cost to the council. There's been a forecast. Let me go on to mention some of the pressures, and then I'll go on to the slides. The pressures and costs of COVID arise from, for example, adult social care, which relate to additional staffing costs and payments to care providers, PPE, the closure of centres, meaning more care at home, long-term care purchasing costs, as routine operations that improve the quality of life of our residents cancelled. So there are more costs to care. In education, the additional costs is the government, for example, was removing free travel for the under 18s. The GLA has to pick up the tab, and that will be passed on to us as taxpayers. In children's, the cost of court delays, obviously as a result of COVID, impacting on the length of secure remand placements, and the increased cost of caring for children with complex needs. And sadly, an increase in the number of looked after children as a result of the illness or death of a parent. We've had rental holidays for local charities, for community groups, sports clubs, and so on. We've had trading losses as a result of the loss of demand for services, planning, scaffold, culture services, and of course, parking income. Mortuary costs. We've had to pay our share of expanded mortuary capacity across London. And our waste, street cleaning and parks have incurred additional expenditure. Temporary accommodation costs have gone up. Housing rough sleepers, deep cleaning, food for self-isolating through the Enfield community hub. You know, we took over the Edmonton Travel Lodge to house all the rough sleepers during the March, April, May lockdown. It may be that we might have to do things like that again. Our food distribution centre that we set up during the pandemic distributed food to help thousands of our residents stay at home and stay safe. PPE, we know of the scandal of PPE in care homes and what happened with residents being discharged into care homes with COVID. The government supplies of PPE for care homes took the army support we had 2 minutes to unload. So we had to buy loads of PPE for the care homes. So all in all, as I said, you know, the COVID has cost quite a lot, both in health terms and in financial terms. So as I said, in the autumn review, we had some further assistance, plus the extension of the furlough scheme brought that cost of COVID down to 55.8 million. That's the kind of context we're operating in, but it's a very, very difficult, and it's very uncertain as well. So I think with those opening longish remarks, I think if we move over to the slides now, I think will Matt be able to screen share the slides so we can talk through those and then take some questions? Great. There we are. Now I need to, right, okay. So this is, sorry, is that slide one? Sorry, I'm just, yeah, great. Ooh. I've lost it. Right, okay. There we are. So, so looking forward to the budget for 2021 to 22, we've been doing an awful lot of work in how we set a balanced budget and what we spend our priorities on. So outlined in this is our response to COVID-19. So our response, we had a robust budget. And I mean, when I spoke to you last year, I talked about how we needed to make sure that this, we had a sustainable budget so we could, you know, plan properly. You can see there that the COVID-19 impact finally was 55.8 million. That was through lost income, council tax and business rates, social care additional costs that I spoke about earlier on, and homelessness. So we had £35.4 million from the government, and we made our own savings to offset the costs and used contingency funds. Businesses had significant rate reliefs and grants. We you know, gave businesses rent-free that were in our council accommodation, and we administered a significant number of amount of business grants to help our businesses through this period. So the next slide. This shows the breakdown of the 55.8 million over 3 areas and by department. If you see, for example, chief executive, corporate, people, place and resources. In all of those, people, for example, that would be adult social care, children's services. In place, that's things like accommodation, and resources, it's things like the car parking income, etc. And I think Matt's going to talk about the next slide. Matt, we can't hear you. Yeah, you're a bit muffled, I think.
Is that better? Can people hear?
Yeah, much better.
Yeah, good. Okay, the last line, I won't go back and talk about it, but I think that was trying to illustrate that the impact of the COVID pandemic has been felt right across the whole council and across all our services, both in terms of the amount of money we have to spend on services and also how much money we bring in as a council through both sales fees and charges and local taxation, be it council tax or business rates. As Councillor Maguire said, right at the start of this, and there was a period of 5-6 months where our forecast costs and losses were in the order of 63-64 million pounds. We have seen our forecasts come down a little bit over the late autumn. And certainly one of the drivers for that has been the extension of the government's furloughing scheme. Within our council tax shortfall in the year, the biggest driver has been council tax support. And at the height, when you consider in the borough we had 55,000 of our 151,000 working population furloughed, we were really worried for our residents and for our own finances when the furloughing scheme was due to end at the end of October. So we'd factored in quite a growth in council tax support. So certainly the extension of the furloughing scheme initially to the end of March this year, and then again on to the end of April is mitigating that for us. So our latest forecast is £55.8 million. We're putting returns into the MHCLG on a monthly basis, so there's quite a lot of activity there for the council just on the finance side. The government did come in with some early tranches of funding. It did look as if it was going to dry up a bit at the end of the summer. The first couple of tranches were £1.6 billion nationally, of which we were sharing 7-8 million of that. Towards the end of the summer, that all of a sudden it was £500 million nationally, and sort of indication from government that nothing more was going to come through. Yet in October time, a bit of a change in the scenery there, and a further £1 billion, of which we as Enfield benefited the tune of about £9 million. So to date, total funding from government of £35.3 million, which is short of our overall pressures of £55 million that we forecast to incur. Again, as Councillor Maguire said, we've looked at our budgets in year and we've made in-year savings, and actually we've been able to draw down on the council's contingency that's built into its budget. The work that we've done over the last 2 years, putting the council's finance on a more robust footing, has paid off. And in previous years, that contingency would have already been spoken for. We're also in an unusual position at the council with the underlying monitoring showing that we're marginally, that's very marginal against a sort of £230 million net spend, marginally underspending in year as well, which helps. That leaves a gap. And then, as Councillor Maguire said, an element of our pressures this year is on our collection fund. And that's the money we collect for business rates and council tax. That's £12.7 million adrift. And under the vagaries of local government accounting, that deficit is always rolled forward and dealt with in the following year's budget. And that's what we're currently planning to do. There's been some government help around that, and they've said we can deal with that over 3 years, rather than having a massive cliff edge impact on our budget in 1 year, which it would do in 21, 2012 in other case. So that's where we're currently at in year. So I'll move the slides on and I'll hand back over to Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Matt. Well, I hope you can hear me. I've got the bin collection outside at the moment, so you might hear the council bin collectors out there. So if we look at the financial environment that we're in for next year, and what I found really, really disappointing each year from this government is not the fact, is apart as well as the fact that they continually reduce funding, is the fact that they don't have any long-term planning. We have got, it's very, very difficult to plan when all you are given is 1 year's budget, in advance. And so there's huge uncertainty for our budget planning. Having said that, as a council and our finance team, we do have a 5-year medium-term financial plan that we work to. And we have a 10-year capital programme and a treasury management programme that we work to. So we do our planning as best we can, but it is in this environment of uncertainty over future funding. We've had a 1-year settlement. That's really not good enough in terms of how you are running a local council and the services to residents. The fair funding, which we continually promised, and I know the over 50s have been campaigning rigorously for ages and ages for fair funding. We still haven't seen it. All the business rates reset. It's delayed and delayed and delayed. There is no long-term solution to adult social care funding. We keep being promised a government green paper or white paper or whatever colour paper they want to produce it on. I don't care. I wish they'd just produce one, because it is something, and it's been thrown up during this COVID crisis, that we really do need to tackle this issue. And as I said, the spending review announcement that was made at the end of November was late and was for a single year, and we have the continued COVID-19 pressures. And everybody says there's the light at the end of the tunnel, that the vaccine once it's rolled out to as many people as possible, that we might get back to something near normal. But we don't know what our local economy, the national economy, is going to look like. We don't know what our local economy is going to look like. We don't know which of our local businesses that employ local people will have folded or collapsed. How many of our residents will be in work? So there is so much uncertainty there. And I don't want to be doom and gloom, because we are trying to deal with a situation that many of us have never seen and never hoped to see. But you know, we have to be aware of what the issues are. So I think we'll move on to the next slide. I think Matt's going to talk about the next slide.
Yep. So we're in fairly uncharted territory with our budget set in for 2021-22. We're having to look both at our underlying position and also at the impact of COVID on our finances, and actually how long some of those pressures from COVID will persist for. Because what it's very clear to us is that post 21-2, we will still be feeling some of the impact of COVID-19 on the council finances. That's for sure. So we're nearing the end of our budget setting process. There's a report to Cabinet on the 3rd of February that then goes on to full council on the 24th. And we're not too far off now from balancing the budget. We're currently £1.6 million adrift. But I would like to just talk about the underlying position a bit first. And setting COVID aside, it is always a challenge balancing the books for a local authority, because the money that we receive in through grants and taxes is very rarely covers off the actual inflationary and demographic pressures that a local authority experiences. So we all know that there's a growing population, an aging population, so some more older people to take care of, and also a growing younger population and a growing younger population with increasing special education needs. So we have demographic pressures of £3.5 million. We actually plan and model those across the medium term, and we did last year extend our approach around that. So this encompasses adult social care, children's social care, and also SEN transport. That is a particular pressure for Enfield and other local authorities. We have, on just going back to inflation, there's the pay award to cover off cost of living, and then there's also contractual commitments that we have today in our day-to-day business that we need to build into the budget. And under other pressures, one element of that that's worth mentioning is our capital financing costs. The council, are running alongside its revenue budget, has a capital programme that, as Councillor Maguire said, it is a 10-year programme. And for things like highways maintenance of our buildings, refresh of our ICT programmes, we have to borrow to be able to fund that. So we need to build in the capital financing costs, so the interest and the principal repayments into our revenue budget. Yeah, so that's where we are with the underlying budget, and that's in good health at the moment, and it needs to be, because over the medium term, when we project forward, we've got another £40 million to find over the next 5 years. So that's putting us in a good starting position for future years as well. The real uncertainty, though, is still with COVID-19, and that is having a detrimental effect on our overall budget. The two big areas that are really challenging to forecast are council tax support. So we had a marked increase in unemployment in the borough between 1st of January and August last year, 160-70%, and we've seen vast numbers of people furloughed. And just in year, with a furlough scheme in place, council tax support in the borough has grown by £2.5 million. What we're having to do now is forecast what the impact will be on council tax support when the furloughing scheme falls away. And there are some really scary forecasts kicking around about the percentage of people on furlough who will become unemployed and need to be supported by benefits by the council. So that's a really tricky area to forecast, but a significant pressure. Similarly, on business rates, is incredibly difficult to forecast now. We collect about 130-40 million pounds of business rates a year, of which Enfield just keeps a proportion. Some of it's paid over central government and some over to the GLA. But of that 140 million pounds in the current year, because of the various reliefs that the government gave out at the start of COVID, our actual rates that we were needing to collect was 45 million pounds lower. And then on top of that, there's been a whole raft of grants to business as well. So it's now very difficult to forecast how much of that 130-40 million pounds we're expecting there to be collected in 21-2, and what are recovery rates likely to be. And that's on the backdrop of all that support that was in the current financial year. So at the moment, we're working on both of these numbers as we need to set our council tax and business rates base by council by the end of this month. So we have another week or so to work out our final forecasts on those. And then the next couple of lines, this is drawing on our experience of COVID in the current financial year. So our return that we made to MHCLG with the £55 million at the end of November, December, we've been through that on a line by line basis and actually looked about what the impact could be beyond the 1st of April. And at the moment, we're forecasting that we could still be incurring costs of around £10 million due to COVID next year. To date, we've, and this was in the government's local government finance provisional settlement in December and had come out of the spending review at the end of November. There are a number of grants that we've been notified of. And at the moment, it looks like there's about £18.6 million of support coming our way. That does leave a gap and put pressure on the council. And some of this already, we've acknowledged that we're going to have to dip into council reserves to cover off. But as things stand, we're about £6 million short due to COVID. We're about 4 in hand with our underlying budget, but still a £1.6 million gap to find. So that's our current position. So back to you, Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Matt. So there is also council budget engagement. So you can see here, and these slides, I've sent them to Tony so he can email them round as well if you need further to refer to them. So the consultation is available on the council's website and you can see the link there. It's useful to hear residents' views, but I do have to say we have a little wriggle room. If someone says they want millions of pounds spent on one area and we haven't got it, well, you know, I'm afraid we have to make decisions, but we do want to know what residents think, and particularly this forum. And if I move to the next slide, this looks at the kind of questions that we've put. So it talks about reducing the number of staff delivering services and functions, increasing our income, improving technology, changing our contracts, encouraging self-service from residents, reducing services, making better use of our priorities. They sound like terrible choices, don't they? But hopefully we won't have to get to the position of reducing staff, etc. But if you just look at these questions, and the next slide shows, to give you a flavour of what the questions are, I would be grateful if you could take part in that. And if it would just, and you can do that at your leisure because it's got runs for another couple of weeks. If we look at concessionary travel, the next slide, because I think it's important to look at this one. So it has had an impact. we are committed to retaining concessionary travel because we think it's a good thing, it's important. As you can see, during the first lockdown in spring, journey numbers on buses reduced by over 80% and on the underground by over 90%, not surprisingly. And in fact, I think most of you will probably remark the same as I do, that this lockdown at this time seems a lot noisier and a lot busier than the lockdown in March and April. I mean, I don't remember hearing any traffic or planes or seeing crowds of people about, but there's a lot more activity this time, I think. So it says how much the London-wide Freedom Pass cost us as a council, 11.468 million. This will reduce because it's based on the number of journeys that are made. But having said that, I did say earlier on that we will be expected to contribute towards the cost of travel, both Freedom Pass and the travel for the under 18s when the GLA have just set their precept, which will be added to any council tax increase that we agree. One other thing I will say is that the government, before I take questions, and I see there's quite a few questions in the chat, the government made great play of saying how much money in the recent announcement, in the recent settlement of how much money, you know, we would have available. But what they didn't emphasise is that that money would have to be raised by us through council tax and through a 3% additional adult social care precept. So they're not giving us that funding. They're saying you're allowed to raise that funding through taxation. So I just wanted to make clear what the government's plans were. So if we move over to questions, and thanks very much, Matt, for doing the figures, because that's really important. But Matt will stay on for questions. Do you want
Excuse me, I'm going to stop sharing now, and then I can see the questions as well, because all I can see is my presentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is it okay if I go through the questions in the chat, and then if there are any further questions, Chair?
Mary, that's absolutely brilliant, because I think you've already answered some of the questions in your presentation. But if you'd like to go through them and save me a job, I'd be delighted.
Okay. Right. So the question from Anne Zinkin about when furlough is lifted, many Enfield residents may lose their jobs. What allowance will the council give them for council tax payment? Well, if people lose their jobs and then have to rely on benefits, there's an income or universal credit, etc., then they will be eligible for council tax support scheme. And I think Matt's spoken about the numbers who, the additional numbers who qualified for council tax support. So the answer is yes. If they have no income, if they're relying on benefits, there are certain criteria, obviously, or if they fall into some of the protected categories, then they will receive council tax support. How many council tax staff lost their jobs in the year ending? I don't think we've lost any jobs. In fact, we'd have to take on some additional agency staff to cover for some of our staff who've had to self-isolate or been ill because of COVID. And I think there's a question about staff next year. I'll talk about that. Oh yes, it is. And what's the prognosis for next year? Well, I'm quite clear, and our steer clearly to the council is that we want to avoid compulsory redundancies wherever we possibly can. I hope that they would be kept to an absolute minimum. I think there are some losses, but what we do first of all is that we have a lot of agency staff that are employed on a one-off basis or whatever for various things, that we would seek to make sure that our permanent staff are protected, and if there's any reduction, it would be amongst the agency staff or consultants that we use. But Matt, I don't know whether you've got any figures further on that. I think it's not great.
Yeah, I think when we took our first tranche of proposals to Cabinet in October, and that was the bulk of our savings programme of £10 million went there. There were at that stage about 40-50 posts at risk. But what the council is very much minded to do is to manage that as effectively as it can through turnover. And also the council does have a strong redeployment programme as well. So we're doing everything we can do to avoid, as Councillor Maguire said, to avoid compulsory redundancy and the cost that brings along as well.
Thanks, Matt. And also, I mean, obviously we are in discussions with the trade unions about all the proposals that we have, and to minimise the impact on staff. Irene, has there been any indication from government as to how councils are expected to meet statutory obligations in the future, given that fairer funding is glibly talked about but not acted upon? Your guess is as good as mine, is my simple answer to that. But, we are determined that we will, do our utmost to make sure that good services are delivered to our residents. I mean, the fact of the matter is that can't envisage a situation where the government doesn't give us any funding for next year. I mean, it just would be ridiculous. But you're right under this about the fairer funding. We're working with London councils and other groups to continue to lobby for fairer funding and for a decent settlement. I don't know whether Matt wants to add anything on the statutory obligations.
Yeah, just on the fairer funding, I guess we've seen the work the government to date has done on fairer funding, and the council is disadvantaged at the moment because the historical funding regime built in a level of damping, and we need to see that unwind. There's much talk about, when there is a fair funding review, that money will leave London and go to other parts of the country. But the work we're doing with some of our neighbouring outer London boroughs actually demonstrates that over the last decade, deprivation has moved out of central London. And actually, when you do see some of those overall changes coming through from the implementation of fair funding, that Enfield would actually be a beneficiary of that. So we're continuing to lobby and lobby hard, but actually working not just with all London councils, which is our normal approach, but working with selected ones who have similar demographics and circumstances to Enfield.
Okay. From Kathy, is the council conducting surveys of businesses and council taxpayers regarding their forecasts for 2021? The answer is I don't know. Do you, Matt? No,
I'm not sure whether we're actually conducting surveys, but what we are doing, we've got a really good, strong data team in the council. So we've got a great deal of internal knowledge on our business rates and council tax position, but we've also using some specialists, given the extraordinary circumstances we have this year, to help us hone our forecasts for the council tax and rates base numbers.
And obviously there's these the budget engagement, which council taxpayers obviously be able to contribute to. Extraordinary from Beverly, I accept these are extraordinary times, but how much responsibility does the council bear for care homes? Are all care homes council run? No, they're not. Most of the care homes are private, but we do have some council run. But we do have a responsibility to the residents in the care homes and to make sure that those care homes are properly run, etc. And, they have been doing a fantastic job during this pandemic. The workers there have done their absolute utmost when residents have been unable to see any of their relatives come to visit them or anything like that. I mean, my own mother is 93. She's in a home in Ireland. I used to go and visit once every 6 weeks. I haven't seen her since March. But, you know, the care home there, just like the care home workers here, are, you know, doing their absolute best to keep people going. I mean, if there are any supplementaries, we can take them afterwards, hey? COVID has wrecked the business
Sorry,
model.
could I just come in on the social care just a bit as well?
Oh, sure.
Within the £55 million, an element of that has been support that the council has given directly to our care homes as well. So it's given a lot of support with contractual payments, and also support around PPE. And one of the instructions that government did give to local authorities right at the start of the crisis, that we need to do everything we could to maintain our supplier base, so to support care homes and others when they were suffering financially. So we've done that, and that's it reflected in the £55 million.
Where are we? Leisure providers, Fusion. How will the council ensure that leisure centres stay open and, most importantly, are affordable for all Enfield residents? Tricky one, that, with Fusion. We are looking at our procurement, obviously. My preference, actually, for lots of our services is that they should be in-house. But I don't know whether Matt's got any inkling of how, or any. I know we are having discussions with Fusion about the future, but I don't know whether they've advanced.
Yeah, there's nothing I can really add to what you've just said, Councillor Maguire. There are discussions taking place with Fusion around the service, but some of those are naturally sensitive and confidential.
Yeah, and I mean, it is important. Our leisure facilities are important for our residents. You know, good health and exercise, but obviously we can't use many of them at the moment. Climate action plan, which was presented some weeks ago. Provision that I think is the council made for funding the climate action plan, which was presented some weeks ago. Many of those parts of the climate action plan come within different budgets, like, for example, the housing revenue account, which is looking at green housing, for example, sustainable housing. I've just been discussing a new procurement policy that is ethical and sustainable, and that is part of the climate action plan. So I don't think it's got separate funding, but each funding stream that we have includes an element of climate, of dealing with climate action. Low traffic neighbourhoods, for example. Matt, do you want to?
Yeah, I think the challenge for us with the climate action plan is to deliver as much of it as we can within our existing resources. There are things that council are doing through its capital programme, for example, that support that. And one of those is the changes we've made to street lighting, and using a greener solution for that. The council also, in terms of its climate team, looking at opportunities to identify external funding and bring grants into the council.
Thanks. The impact of Brexit on the council's pension investments. What might be the knock-on effect of any pressures? I don't know about the pension investments, but there is a investments board, which is kind of separate to.
Yeah, I can say a couple of things about that.
Great.
Yeah, so the obviously the markets took a real nosedive at the end of March, early April. The council's pension fund is revalued every 3 years, and we've just gone through the latest revaluation exercise. And for the first time in sort of recent history, we had a fully funded scheme. Most local authority schemes over the last decade have been running at about 80-85% funded. So we've come into the crisis in a strong position. The markets did go down initially, but they've bounced back on the whole. And the most recent figures is that the fund's about 103% funded at the moment. But when you look at all the uncertainty out there and the impact that the continued crisis is having the economy, this is going to be an area we're going to have to really keep a very close eye on. So it's all right at the moment, but we're expecting a bit of turbulence ahead, I think.
Thanks. Well, I've lost us. Okay, will we be scrapping freedom passes? No. The DEFRA bin structure grant. Yes, we apply for as many, you know, our policy is that we apply for as many grants that will help us as possible. The impact on frontline services, we're trying to make sure that the impact on frontline services is reduced. We want to maintain frontline services, and how we approach our savings is in that vein. And they've all been through the various different cabinet members who are responsible for the different areas to ensure that frontline services are maintained. We should have been sent the slides before the meeting. Guilty as charged. I've had quite a lot on over the past few days, so sorry that they were late arriving to you. The survey, vague. Pretty difficult, really, when the choices are quite limited. It's to get a flavour of what people and residents think are their priorities. So we could always do those better. And every year someone says, oh, you should have done this, you should have done that. But I'm afraid I can't really change what we've done now at the minute.
Could I just say a couple of words about that? Because I'm really keen that we do get the view of our residents on our financial plans, but it is really difficult to strike a right balance between high level summary information and line by line detail. And I do talk to my neighbouring finance directors about this, and they all struggle. There's nobody who's really nailed it. We have tried this year to make it a bit more accessible, and the slide Councillor Maguire went through with question 1, those sub bullets, we've actually tried to group all the individual savings lines against that to give it a bit of a more straightforward feel. The link, and obviously it's clear that some of you have seen the line by line data, but the link on the consultation will take you through to a line by line basis of all the savings that we're proposing. But if people have got some sort of constructive comments about how we might improve it, I'm more than welcome to, more than happy to take those on board. It's an area that myself and neighbouring colleagues all really do struggle with, but we genuinely do want to hear your views, and I would ask that as many as you do complete the survey and send it back into the council, please.
The question on youth services, I don't have the details of how much we're spending on youth services, but we do have maintained the budget in that area, haven't we? Yeah,
there's certainly one of the approaches we've had with this year's budget, and we did last year as well. It's almost not investing a lot more in lots of services because we don't have the wherewithal to do that, but we have sought to protect services, and those services to the most vulnerable in our community are the ones that we focused on protecting from savings, and youth very definitely is one of those.
Okay, is council tax likely to rise? I'll give a politician's answer here. The government has said that we can raise council tax by 1.99%, and we can raise the adult social care precept of another 3%. Then there's the GLA precept that we will have to pay. This has still to be discussed by Cabinet, Labour Group and Cabinet, before we make a decision. But the answer, I suppose, is that if we don't increase council tax by that amount, then we will have to make further cuts. I think at this stage, the majority of London boroughs are going to increase council tax by that amount. You know, unless the government says they'll come forward and fund, then I think that it's likely that it will happen. But as I said, no firm decision has been taken yet.
Yeah, and I ought to apologise actually, because when I did slide 7, I skipped over the grants and taxes on the left-hand side of that slide, and the taxes, every 1% of council tax increase raises about £1.3 million. So it's going to be a real struggle for the council to balance the books without looking to council tax. So the plans at the moment, and obviously this needs to go through appropriate governance. That 8 million includes 3% for the adult social care precept, 2% for a basic council tax increase, and on top of that, there are new homes continually being built in the borough. So this increase in our tax base that brings in about just short of £1 million as well.
Okay. What support is the council offering to schools to help set up mandatory COVID testing? We are discussing with schools how to do this, and I think we're going to go in. We can only do it at weekends or half term. I think we're setting up the COVID testing, helping them with that. A lot of volunteers have helped the council keep things moving and protect our own community during this time. Yes, absolutely. And fantastic number of people volunteered at the community hub, the supply centre, and also volunteered with getting shopping for people, volunteered with phoning people to make sure that they were all right. And I think, you know, volunteers have got a massive role to play and have played a huge part in protecting our communities. So thank you to them. We had a bit on climate change. We've already kind of covered that, I think. LTNs. So on the low traffic neighbourhoods, I would ask everybody to make sure that they make their views known through the consultation on let's talk at enfield.gov.uk. Some people love it, some people hate it. The idea about it is to make our neighbourhoods pleasanter and less polluted, and to encourage more active travel like walking, cycling, etc. But I do know that there is a lot of strong feelings, I suppose, on either side. But I think it's important that as many people as possible let their views be known through that, and then we can assess properly how the trial period is going. The LTN money that we get can only be spent on the LTN zones, just as the cycling money could only be spent on that. It can't be spent on anything else. We wouldn't get it. Street lighting has changed, but it's rendered our streets more unsafe. I think the new lights we put in are energy saving. You know, they're reducing the impact on the environment, and they are brighter. There must is there any particular place where they seem to be lower? But actually, I see someone later on has said ours are brighter than they need to be. So yeah, some low, some bright. But I mean, our strategy is to make sure that they're more energy efficient. Private landowners in council are also not getting their rent paid. Out of job, and there's no help to get Money from tenants is there, I know. I'm not sure about that. If there are people who are unable to pay their rent, they should come to the council for advice and assistance. They may be entitled to other benefits that might help them. I don't know, Matt, you see that question I'm talking about from Jasvinder about private landlords?
That shouldn't be the case. Those rents should be
Should be
coming
paid.
through where landlords have tenants who are on benefits and are eligible for housing support.
Yeah, so they should get in touch with the council about that. Pension turbulence, Matt.
So we have assets and liabilities in our pension funds. We have to employ actuaries to tell us what the liabilities are because they have to look into the future. And then that's all funded by our assets. And our assets, we have growth assets in the fund, so we have equities, and then we have liability matching assets that are bonds, and they'll track inflation and the like. So the growth of the pension fund is driven by equities, and we all know how turbulent equity markets can be. So that's what I was referring to there.
Okay, thanks. A number of London councils have joined the age-friendly community scheme. It is free. Can Mary push the cat? Yes, I will look into this, Tony. Oh, pensioner 64 and female, not going to get my pension till I still have a bill to pay. Well, you know, this is what the government changed the rules on retirement for women. So I think the age now is it 67 or 68 arbitrarily?
I think for people who are currently in close to that age, it's still sort of 65. I know because I would be self-interested, but my own, I'm 55 and my pension age is now 67. But for people in their 60s, I believe for a pensioner who's 64, it's probably still 65, isn't it?
No, it's not.
No,
it's not, Matt. No.
Yeah, so
no. I mean, what can I say? The government changed the rules, and you know, it happened to a whole host of women who were expecting to retire at 60 and had no little time to prepare for it. I'm not sure about the issue about having to pay bills from savings. Well, yeah, that's if you have difficulties, you need to access advice to see whether there are some benefits that might be available to you. Share slide 8 again. Can you do that again?
Yeah. Do you want me to share? Yeah. Do you want me to?
Questions?
Do you want me to share it, or are people happy to have the slides sent round? Because when the slides come round, you can just click on the link.
Yeah. I sent the deck to Tony so he could send it round. Is that all right? Was there another one? We dealt with a Brexit issue. Council. Our environment emits effect on general moods. Throwing away masks. Oh my goodness, this actually makes me so angry. The amount of fly tipping and litter dumping. You know, on the corner of my road, for example, someone dumped a couple of old telephone directories. So our council came and picked them up. You know, they've got the roving lorries that go around. Yesterday, there's 2 big old mattresses dumped there. So they think that once the council's picked it up from there, they can go and dump again. Do we... Could we organise resident litter picking teams? Well, I know down in Palmer's Green, there's a Palmer's Green action team organised a litter picking and a cleaning up of things. So I think probably at the moment it would be a bit difficult. I mean, it'd be a bit difficult to ask residents to go and pick up discarded COVID masks, for example, because of the risks of infection. But I agree that there are a lot of litter louts out there, and I wish we had more powers to deal with them. But the idea of litter picking teams is quite a good community thing, but I think not at the moment, frankly. Private landlords evicting legal tenants. Well, they're not supposed to be evicting at the moment, are they, Matt?
No.
No, they're not. So, but that's something that we could look at later on. Yes, Christina said it's 66 if they're 64 now. Right. Okay, shall I shut up now?
Mary, I think you've done a brilliant job there. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful. Okay, I'm going to wind up a little bit. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for your fantastic questions. I wasn't expecting quite so many questions, but they've been really good, and I really appreciate the fact that you've participated in this way. It's been really, really good. But I'd most of all like to thank Mary and Matt. I'm afraid I would not want to be in your shoes. I think you've got a massive mountain to climb, and I certainly don't want to climb it with you. But we all are climbing that mountain, aren't we? And we've got to think about the future. Now, I think we've had getting on for 100 people in this meeting today. People actually say after meetings like this, I'm going to go and complete the survey. Now, you have no excuse. You are sitting at home. You've all got IT. You can all get onto the council website. So I am expecting at least 100 people in the next week to complete that survey and tell the council what you think. If we don't, it's notorious that people say, I'm going to do it, but I don't. And I'm definitely going to do it. And I really, really would like to encourage all you over 50s to get stuck in, fill in the survey, so that then you can't say, oh, moan, 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 they didn't do what I wanted. If you haven't filled in the survey, no excuses. So am I right, Mary?
Yes, absolutely right. Yes, participate.
Absolutely. So I'd like to thank Mary and Matt for so generously giving up their time this morning and giving us lots of information, which I think has been really useful. I think it will be great when Tony sends the slides around to all of us and we can have another look through them. But as I said, I do hope that you will all take the responsibility for going away and filling in that survey. It's all anonymous, so we'll never know whether you did it or not, but actually, I do hope that there will be an influx, Mary. In next week, you'll see that we've taken you at your word. So thank you all very much indeed. Really, really appreciate everybody's attendance this morning. And as I said, particularly Mary and Matt for all that information, which actually I'm not a great financial whiz kid, but it did make sense. So I appreciate that as well. So thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
And on that
Thank
note,
you.
I think
No, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye now.
thank you.